All right, let's jump into this CSS deep dive. If you're here, I bet you're ready to really get a handle on styling for the web.
Yeah, CSS is really powerful stuff.
It is, and we're using Modcom Institute of Technology's CSS Book 2.pdf. You sent that over to us as our guide. We'll be exploring what CSS is all about and how it impacts web design, right?
Yeah.
We're going to break down how it works, look at all the creative things you can do with it, and even touch on some of the more advanced techniques. So get ready to like completely transform how you think about how web pages come to life.
I think a lot of people don't realize just how much control CSS gives you, the level of precision you can achieve to create really engaging and effective web experiences. It's so much more than just making a website look pretty.
You know, that's so interesting you say that because I was looking at your notes and you were talking about how frustrating it was back in the day when you first started out dealing with inline styling, before CSS was really the standard. What was it like back then?
Oh man, you're talking about the Wild West of web design? It was
Yeah.
crazy. It was like, just imagine every time you wanted to change something visually, you had to embed those styles right there in the HTML content.
Oh, yeah.
It was such a mess. It was so inefficient. And if you needed to make changes across an entire site, it was so time consuming. Like something as simple as changing the color of a font could end up being this huge project.
So basically, it sounds like the content and the presentation were like totally
Yeah,
intertwined,
right.
making it a nightmare to work with.
Exactly. CSS came along and was revolutionary because it finally separated those two things. So, now HTML could just focus on the structure and the meaning of the content, and then CSS swoops in and takes care of all the visual styling.
Okay.
And this made such a huge difference. Websites became way easier to maintain and update, and it really paved the way for all the visually rich websites that we have today. It's really amazing when you think about it.
It is, and it makes me want to understand more about how CSS works, all this visual richness we're talking about.
Yeah.
How does it actually do its magic? Like on a basic level, how does it work?
It's actually pretty simple, believe it or not. The
Yeah.
whole system is based on selectors, properties, and values. Think of it like, you're decorating a room.
Okay. Yeah.
So you've got the selector, which is like choosing which piece of furniture you want to style, right?
Right.
Like a sofa, for example. Then you've got the properties, which are all the design choices you're going to make for that sofa.
Mm.
The color, the fabric, the size, all that stuff. And then the values are like the specifics of those choices, like emerald green velvet or three-seater or mid-century modern, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. I get it. So that means like if we're talking about a website, the selector would be targeting a specific element, right?
Mhm.
Like maybe a paragraph or a heading.
Right.
And then the properties would define how it looks.
Exactly.
And the values are like specific instructions. So like instead of emerald green velvet, it'd be something like midnight blue for the color or 18 pixels for the size of the font.
Exactly. It's such a clear and structured system, which is why you can control like literally every single visual detail of a web page.
Wow. Okay. So then how do you actually get CSS into a website? I know you mentioned like inline, embedded, and external style sheets. What are the differences there?
Yeah, so there are different ways to do it, each with its own pros and cons.
Yeah.
Like inline styles, those are applied directly to a specific HTML element. But most developers, they kind of, try to avoid them because they can make the HTML messy and hard to read.
Right.
Plus, it makes it harder to manage all those styles for the whole website.
Makes sense.
Then you've got embedded styles, those live, within the style tags in the HTML document's head. Those can be fine if you're working on a small project, but again, as the site grows, it can become, hard to keep track of everything. And then there's the external style sheet. That's where it's at. That's a separate file, a .css file that you link to your HTML. And this is like the gold standard. It just keeps things so much more organized, especially for bigger, more complex websites. It's just so much easier to maintain.
So it's kind of like having a central control panel for all your style choices. So you just make one change there and it updates the whole website, right? You don't have to go through each page individually and make the same change over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. Think of it like it's like having an instruction manual for how your website should look. You don't want those instructions scattered all over the place, right? You want them all in one place where you can easily find them and update them.
Absolutely. So CSS really did revolutionize web development, making it a much more streamlined and manageable process. But let's move on to the fun stuff. I want to know what you can actually do with CSS. Like, what are some of the creative possibilities that really get you excited?
Oh man, there are so many. I don't even know where to start. We've touched on some of the basics like colors and fonts, but CSS can do so much more than that. You can create what are called dynamic states, like those cool hover effects that change how something looks when you mouse over it. Like subtle color changes or little animations.
Hmm.
You can even reveal hidden content that way. And then you can use positioning to arrange elements on the page exactly how you want them without having to change the underlying HTML structure.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff. It's almost like having an invisible hand shaping the whole layout of your website.
That's amazing. One thing I've always wondered about is I've seen these websites with all those really slick animations, and I always assumed that you needed to use like complex JavaScript to create them. But are you telling me that you can actually do that stuff with CSS?
You got it. CSS3, the latest version, it brought in a whole bunch of new tools for doing animation. You can do all sorts of things now. Smooth transitions, fading effects, and even like really intricate multi-step animations, all without writing a single line of JavaScript. It's pretty amazing.
Wow. So you're saying you can make things like elements gracefully glide across the screen, those subtle loading animations, even like make elements respond to user actions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The possibilities are really quite remarkable. You can get as creative as you want with it.
So CSS is basically like, it's not just about styling. It's almost like you're choreographing the user experience in a way, right?
Exactly. You're shaping the way users interact with the website and, how they perceive the information and the content. It's really about creating a seamless and engaging experience for them.
So this is all starting to make sense, but one thing I've always gotten a little confused about is the difference between IDs and classes in CSS. Can you explain that?
Sure, sure. That's a really common thing for people to get tripped up on, especially when they're first starting out. Think about it this way. Imagine you're in a city, right?
Okay.
Think of IDs like the street address of a building. It's unique to that one building. So when you use an ID selector in CSS, it's like you're saying, hey, I want to style this specific element and no other. But with classes, it's more like the labels you see on mailboxes. Multiple buildings on the same street might have the same type of mailbox, right? So they share that characteristic. In the same way, you can apply a class selector to multiple elements on a page. It's a way to group them together and style them all the same way.
Got it. So an ID makes sure something is unique, while a class lets you reuse styles and group elements together.
That's the idea. It all comes down to writing clean and organized code that's easy to understand and maintain.
This is really starting to click for me. I'm seeing how logical CSS is and all the amazing creative potential it has. I'm really excited to dig into some of the specifics that ModCom's guide covers, things like the box model and text manipulation. Can we talk about those next?
Definitely. Those are like, the fundamental building blocks. Once you understand those, you can really start to take your designs to the next level. We can definitely unpack those next.
All right, let's dive into this box model thing. It sounds kind of intimidating, but I'm curious to see how it all fits into, like the structure of a website. You're saying that every HTML element, you can think of it like a box.
Yeah, it's a really helpful way to visualize how layouts work in web design. Basically, you imagine each element, like a paragraph, a heading, an image, as a rectangular box with its content inside. And the box model defines how much space is around that content, so you can really fine-tune how everything looks and interacts on the page.
So it's not just about what's inside the element, it's about the space around it too,
Yeah.
and how that affects the whole layout.
Exactly. There are four main parts to the box model: the content itself, the padding, the border, and the margin. It's kind of like packing a gift if you want a visual.
Oh, okay, I like that. I'm a visual learner, so that helped.
Yep.
Tell me more about this gift packing analogy.
Okay, so imagine the gift itself is your content, right? The padding is like the cushioning you put around the gift to protect it. It's the space between the content and the border. The border is like the wrapping paper, it gives your gift a nice frame. And then the margin, that's like the space you leave between the wrapped gift and any other gifts in the box so they don't get squished. It's the space between one element and its neighbors.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So by adjusting the padding, the border, and the margin of each element, you can
Yeah.
basically like fine-tune the whole layout of the entire
You
page.
got it. If you really want to avoid layout headaches and make sure your website looks clean and organized, you've got to master the box model. It gives you so much control over spacing, making sure things breathe, that the content flows nicely, and everything aligns the way you want it to.
That's really helpful. It's amazing how such a simple concept can have such a huge impact on the design. Now, Modcom's guide also talks about text manipulation, and that's something that's always fascinated me. Like CSS gives you so much control over typography beyond just choosing fonts, right? What are some of the ways you can manipulate text with CSS?
Oh, it's incredible how much you can do. You can control the alignment, add decorations like underlines or overlines. You can even transform the text to uppercase or lowercase, and even control the spacing between letters and words.
Spacing between letters and words, that's something I've definitely struggled with, especially when I'm trying to achieve a certain, typographic look. Are there any specific CSS properties that you use a lot for that kind of fine-tuning?
Yeah, definitely. Letter spacing and word spacing are like my best friends when it comes to fine-tuning, the spaces between characters and words. And then text align, that's essential for controlling how the text lines up. Whether you want it centered, justified, left or right aligned. And then there's text indent, which is, well, it's kind of a multi-purpose tool.
Text indent, yeah. I've seen some really creative uses of that, like pulling quotes or creating those cool, unique paragraph styles. It's almost like a hidden gem in the CSS toolbox.
It's definitely versatile, and a lot of people don't realize all the things you can do with it. Traditionally, it's used to indent the first line of a paragraph, but you can do so much more. Like, you can use a negative text indent to create a hanging indent, where the first line sticks out further than the rest of the paragraph, or you can combine it with other properties to create, like, these interesting visual rhythms and hierarchies in your text.
Those are great examples. It just goes to show that even the simplest CSS properties can unlock all these creative possibilities if you just play around and see what you can do.
That's the beauty of CSS. There's always something new to discover, always something to play with. It never gets boring.
And speaking of playing around, we can't forget about links. They're so important for, guiding users through your content and connecting to other resources. How does CSS let us style links and make them, really work well for users?
Styling links well is like super important if you want your website to be engaging and easy to use. The cool thing about links is that they actually have 4 different states that you can style differently.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember seeing that in Modcom's guide, but I've always been a little confused about what those states actually mean. Can you explain those?
Sure. So you've got the link state,
Yeah.
which is just how a regular unvisited link looks. Then there's the visited state, which is how the link looks after someone has clicked on it. That way people can see where they've already been on your site. Then you've got the hover state, which is how the link looks when you move your mouse over it. That's a great way to give users visual feedback and make the website more interactive. And finally, there's the active state, which is what happens when you're actually clicking on the link. Often you'll see a subtle effect to show that the click has registered.
It's like you're having a visual conversation with the user, right?
Yeah,
Guiding them through the website and letting them know what's going on.
exactly. And by styling each of these states in a thoughtful way, you can create a sense of visual hierarchy. Draw the user's eye to certain things and just make the whole experience more intuitive and enjoyable. Like, for example, you could make unvisited links a brighter color so they stand out more. And then when they've been visited, maybe make them a little bit darker to show that the user has already been there.
It's like creating this subtle but really effective visual language that makes the website more usable and just more fun to use.
Exactly. And the great thing is, with CSS, we have all the tools we need to create that language with a lot of precision and nuance.
We talked a little bit about animations before, and I'm really curious to learn more about those. CSS3, the latest version, it seems like it really took animations to a whole new level. What were some of the biggest advancements that it brought in, and how have those changed web design?
CSS3 was like a major turning point when it came to animation. Before that, if you wanted to do anything really complex, you had to rely on JavaScript, and that could get really messy and complicated. But CSS3 introduced these 2 really cool features, transitions and keyframe animations, and those changed everything.
Can you break those down for me a little bit? I hear those terms a lot, but I'm not always sure I understand the difference between them.
Yeah, sure. So with transitions, you can smoothly animate changes to CSS properties over time. Like, for example, you could have a transition that makes the background color of a button slowly change from blue to green when you hover over it. It's a really simple way to add some movement and visual interest.
Okay.
Now, keyframe animations, those are a little bit more involved. They let you create like these multi-step animations where you can define exactly how the element should look at different points in the animation sequence. So you have like way more control over the timing, the easing, and the different visual effects you can create.
So it's kind of like transitions are good for simple, elegant animations, and then keyframes let you do more complex, elaborate stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the difference between a simple fade in and like a choreographed dance routine. They both have their place, and you can use them to create all sorts of cool visual effects.
I can see how animations, when they're done well, can really add a layer of delight and interactivity to a website. Like it can really draw the user's eye and make the whole experience more fun.
For sure. They can make a static website feel so much more dynamic and engaging. Imagine like elements subtly sliding into view as you scroll down the page, or interactive elements that respond with like playful little animations when you click on them. It just adds a touch of personality and makes things more interesting.
That's so cool. But I imagine it's important not to overdo it, right? Too much animation could be distracting or even annoying.
Definitely, it's all about finding the right balance. Animations should always enhance the user experience, not detract from it. They should feel natural and intuitive, not jarring or overwhelming.
Right. So it's about being strategic with how you use them, making sure they serve a purpose, like guiding the user's attention, telling a story, or evoking a certain emotion.
Exactly. Like any design element, animation should have a reason for being there. It should contribute to the overall message and the feel of the website.
This has been so helpful. It's really amazing to see how CSS has evolved from, just controlling basic styles to creating these really sophisticated animations and interactive experiences. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how CSS has influenced like the overall trends in web design over the years. Has it changed the way we approach design for the web in general?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to overstate the impact that CSS has had on web design. Like, back in the early days of the web, design was so limited by what you could do with HTML. Websites were mostly just text-based with really basic layouts. But CSS, it completely revolutionized everything. It brought in this whole new era of like visually rich, engaging, and dynamic web experiences. It's been amazing to see how much things have changed.
It's like CSS gave designers this whole new language to express themselves on the web, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Suddenly, designers had all these tools to create unique brand identities, to guide users through complex information in a visual way, and to really evoke emotions through carefully crafted visual aesthetics. It was a huge leap forward for web design.
You mentioned guiding users visually. I'm really interested in how CSS has shaped our understanding of like user experience UX design. It seems like there's a really strong connection between those two things.
Oh, for sure. There's a ton of overlap between CSS and UX design. The way you structure content, how you create visual hierarchies, how you incorporate interactive elements, all of these things are heavily influenced by CSS, and they all contribute to the overall user experience. A well-designed CSS framework can make a website so much easier to navigate, more visually appealing, and just like more enjoyable to interact with. It makes a huge difference.
So it's not just about making a website look pretty. It's about using CSS to make sure that it's actually usable and enjoyable for the people who are visiting it.
Exactly. It's about understanding how people use websites, what they need, what they expect, and then using CSS to create an experience that meets those needs in a way that's both effective and elegant. It's a really fascinating challenge.
I'm really starting to appreciate CSS in a whole new way. Now, it's not just a bunch of technical rules. It's like a powerful tool for shaping the user experience and bringing those creative visions to life on the web.
It's been great to explore these ideas with you. It really is amazing how far CSS has come, and it's exciting to see how it keeps pushing the boundaries of what's possible in web design. Who knows what the future holds, but I'm sure it's going to be amazing.
We've talked about the history, the mechanics, the creative side of CSS, but I want to dive a little deeper into some of the newer developments. You mentioned CSS3 earlier. What are some of the key things that it brought to the table, and how have they impacted modern web design?
CSS3 was like a huge milestone in the evolution of CSS. It introduced a whole bunch of new features that really expanded the possibilities and addressed a lot of the limitations of earlier versions. One of the biggest changes was the introduction of media queries, which was a game changer for responsive web design.
Responsive design, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so crucial nowadays with people using so many different devices to access websites, all with different screen sizes and resolutions. How do media queries work, and how have they changed the way we approach web design?
Media queries are basically a way to apply different styles to a web page depending on the device that's accessing it. So you can take into account the screen size, the orientation, the resolution, even things like touch input. You can basically say, okay, if the screen width is less than this many pixels, use these styles, otherwise use these other styles. It's incredibly powerful.
So you can make sure your website looks good and works properly on any device, whether it's a tiny phone screen or a giant desktop monitor. That's amazing.
Exactly. Before media queries, creating websites that adapted to different screen sizes was a nightmare. It involved all sorts of complicated JavaScript hacks and often meant creating entirely separate mobile versions of websites. But media queries made everything so much simpler and more streamlined. Now we can create a single website that adapts gracefully to any screen size. It was a huge step forward.
It's incredible how such a small addition to CSS had such a massive impact on web development. It really shows how CSS is always evolving to meet the changing needs of the web. It's like it's constantly adapting and growing.
It's testament to the ingenuity of the web development community, They're always pushing the boundaries, coming up with creative solutions, and working to make the web more accessible, user-friendly, and visually engaging for everyone. It's really inspiring to be a part of it.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I have a much better understanding now of how powerful and versatile CSS really is, from its humble beginnings to all these incredible new developments. It's really exciting to see where it's going next.
Yeah, it's been great talking about all this with you. It really is remarkable how much CSS has evolved over the years, and it just keeps getting more and more powerful. I can't wait to see what people come up with next.
I know, it's so inspiring to see how far it's come. And it makes me wonder, where is CSS headed? What's the future look like? In your notes, you mentioned that you're really interested in how CSS can create even more immersive and interactive experiences on the web. Are there any specific trends or techniques in that area that you're particularly excited about?
Well, one thing that I'm really fascinated by is how we can use CSS to make websites more accessible. Making sure that everyone can use and enjoy the web regardless of their abilities. I think CSS has a huge role to play in creating inclusive web
Oh,
experiences.
it's a really important point. I know web accessibility is a big topic, but I haven't really thought about how CSS specifically fits into that. Can you give me some examples?
Sure. Think about things like font sizes, color contrast, spacing. We can use CSS to control all of those things and make content easier to read for people with visual impairments. We can also use CSS to add visual cues or create alternative ways to navigate a website for people who might not be able to use a mouse or a keyboard in the typical way.
So it's not just about making a website visually appealing. It's also about using CSS to make those designs accessible to everyone.
Exactly. It's about making sure that everyone can participate in the online world, regardless of their abilities. It's about creating a more inclusive and equitable web for all.
That's such a great point. It's like CSS is becoming more than just a styling language. It's a tool for making a real difference in people's lives.
I agree. And that's one of the things that I love most about working in this field. We have the opportunity to use our skills to make a positive impact on the world, to make the web a better place for everyone.
That's really inspiring. This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I've learned so much about the power and the versatility of CSS, and it's amazing to see how it can be used not only to enhance the aesthetics of the web, but also to make it more accessible and inclusive for everyone.
It's been my pleasure sharing my thoughts and experiences with you. I hope you've come away with a newfound appreciation for CSS and all the incredible things it can do.
I definitely have. And for listeners out there, if you're feeling inspired to learn more about CSS, don't hesitate. There's a whole world of resources out there waiting for you. We've included some links in the show notes, including ModCom's guide, where you can delve deeper into all the concepts we've talked about today.
And remember, the most important thing is to have fun and let your creativity shine. CSS is such a powerful tool for expressing yourself, and there are truly no limits to what you can create. So go out there and make something amazing.
That's a fantastic message. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of CSS. Until next time, happy styling.
Please remember to like and subscribe for more podcasts like this. See you on the next one.